Hey guys, what's up? It's Sydney and welcome back to my channel and to my series Missing Since the 1910s. Before we get into the video, as always, if you want to follow me, feel free to do that on Instagram. It's at Sydney's Poisonous. And my jewelry shop where I sell crystals and things like this is going to be at Perfect Poison Shop. And it's Perfect Poison Shop on Etsy as well. And you can also follow the YouTube Instagram, which is at Sydney's Poisonous YouTube. Let's get into the video. Bobby Dunbar was born in 1908 to parents Percy and Leslie Dunbar. He had a little brother named Alonzo, who was 2 years old, and they lived in Opelousas, Louisiana. As the family was very outdoorsy, and the little boys were as well, very rough and tumble little boys, they actually liked to go camping. So on Friday, August 23rd, 1912, they went camping at Swayze Lake. The Dunbar family went camping with a bunch of extended family and friends. Among these family friends was Paul Mizzy, and Paul Mizzy was especially close to the Dunbars, especially Bobby. Paul Mizzy actually took Bobby, Alonzo, and some other children among the family and the family friends as well to the lake to spend some time there. When Paul Mizzy returned to the campsite, Leslie Dunbar actually noticed that Bobby was missing. And Paul Mizzy didn't notice this at first because he had a gang of kids with him, so it was actually pretty difficult for him to keep an eye on everyone. When Leslie realized that Bobby had gone missing, she actually fainted. They contacted the authorities and the search for Bobby Dunbar started. They started in the lake, which was the first go-to because they thought that he could have drowned. So these are the methods, not in order, of how they searched for him in the lake. So they did have divers. They had dynamite, which they used in the lake, I guess, to kind of blow the water up so they could see the bottom of the lake to see if there was remains. They also used long metal rods with hooks at the bottom so that way they could drag it across the bottom of the lake to possibly pick up any remains or clues to give us to where Bobby was. They had over 500 volunteer searchers for the massive search party for Bobby Dunbar. They also checked the surrounding places of the lake as far as cottages go, people who were staying there. They interviewed everyone in the vicinity, and they even looked for signs of him on the railroad tracks because there was a railroad nearby. When all of these efforts proved ineffective, they actually widened their search to the surrounding states. So not only was Bobby Dunbar's disappearance headline news in Louisiana, but it was also in the surrounding states. Private investigators sent flyers and poster descriptions of Bobby to the surrounding police stations looking for any sign of him or any spottings by any witnesses. The entire town was so distraught by Bobby's disappearance, they actually collected money together and raised a reward for his safe return for $1,000, and that in 1912 would be about $22,000 in today's time. So that was quite a bit of money, but when there was no result that came from the reward, the state returned the money to the townspeople. When they had no luck in the initial search and with the reward posted, the Dunbar family started to get very anxious and seemed rather hopeless. The case seemed to have gone cold until 8 months later. A sighting of Bobby, and you'll understand why I do that later, was seen in Mississippi with a man named William Walters. The reason why William Walters and the boy had actually been spotted in the first place is because he was actually being very abusive to the boy that he had with him, and people called the authority. His story was very shaky as far as who the boy was and who it belonged to and how he had got the boy. And I believe that this was because he actually did kidnap a boy, but it was not Bobby. He claimed that this boy's name was Charles Bruce Anderson and was the illegitimate son of his brother and a woman that actually worked for his family and took care of his parents as their caretaker, and her name was Julia Anderson. Julia Anderson did actually confirm that she allowed William Walters to take her son, but only for like a 2-day period. She basically claimed that William stole her son and had him for, I believe, 13 months. In my opinion, the police were so dead set on this boy being Bobby that they actually contacted the Dunbar family, and the Dunbar family flew out to Missouri to go see this boy. Now, the boy did not respond to the name Bobby and was actually not very fond of the family when the Dunbars went to go see him, to go ID him as their son. The first day that Leslie and Percy were there to see Bobby, he was actually not very responsive towards them or even his brother. And that was very odd, and maybe it had been because of the trauma that he had went through. It was only by the second day that the mother, Leslie, actually identified the boy as her son, Bobby, saying, "It is my boy." But of course, Walters actually protested this and claimed that it was, in fact, Julia Anderson's child, Charles Bruce Anderson. But Walters adamantly denied that this was Bobby Dunbar. He actually proclaimed that it was Julia Anderson's son and that she had actually given him permission to take her son, which she did give him permission initially, but not for 13 months. Either way, if this boy was Bobby or if it was Bruce, he abducted a child. And in Louisiana, that was a capital offense at the time, so of course he's going to say anything to try to get out of that. But even after all of this, the Dunbars were still convinced that it was their boy. In May, Anderson actually went to go see the boy in Louisiana, and he actually did not respond well to Julia Anderson as well. As far as like he responded to the Dunbar parents, he actually responded the exact same way to Julia. And oddly enough, Julia actually couldn't ID the boy right away either. Granted, he's like 4 years old, so his facial features are starting to develop, but they're not quite there yet. But as far as identification marks, he did have a mole on his neck, exactly where Bobby was supposed to have had one. And he did have a scar on his toe, which he got from a burn when he was a child. And apparently this child also had that as well. However, the Dunbar parents said that the boy didn't look like their child at first and said that his eyes were too small. So it's very odd that you would comment on it not looking like your child and then the next day say, "Oh no, it is my child, it's my boy." As a parent, as me being a parent, that's very confusing to me because you know your child. You just do. The whole town of Opelousas wanted this boy to be Bobby so bad. And I don't blame them because it was a tragedy, and the fact that they were just trying to look for a happy ending is innately in everybody's human nature. And I 100% believe that. But at the same time, they were not very nice to Julia. Even though she was still missing a child, they were not very nice to her, especially the press. They actually had reported that she was a prostitute and that she had all these illegitimate children from all these relationships out of wedlock. And it's just very, very sad in the case that she's still missing her child. So they basically painted her with a red brush and she was looked at like a harlot. The whole town was already convinced that this boy was Bobby, and they did not want to give that up. The court actually ruled that this boy was Bobby and that he was to remain as Bobby Dunbar. So completely destroyed, Julia left town. Walters was convicted of kidnapping and was sentenced to life and actually appealed his conviction. He got out on a technicality after 2 years. Unfortunately, Julia died February 1st in 1940. She did have, I read, 7 to 8 other children with another man, but she did die, unfortunately, never knowing what happened to Bruce or if it was, in fact, Bruce that was now with the Dunbars. Although she did believe in her heart that they did kidnap him as far as their son went missing and they just wanted a son to replace Bobby. And she was not shy about this story. She told anyone that she could, and it was actually passed down through her family as well. So the boy, Bobby Dunbar, actually grew up and had a seemingly normal life. He met a woman named Marjorie and had 4 children with her, and then inevitably died in 1966. But here's where the story gets really weird, if it wasn't weird enough already. In 1999, Bobby Dunbar's granddaughter, Margaret, was actually fascinated of the story and started looking into their roots. As the story was passed down from generation within their family, a scrapbook with all of the articles that they could possibly find on the case had been made, and it is reported that there were hundreds. Margaret grew increasingly obsessed with the story and finding out what happened in her family lineage, so she continued researching this until she eventually wanted to have the DNA of her family tested. Margaret's father, Bobby Dunbar's son, actually agreed to give a DNA sample. And this was actually not a popular decision amongst the Dunbar family. Many actually attested to this and did not wish her to do this. But Margaret was curious and wanted to know, and her father was willing to give his DNA, so she had the DNA tested, and it was not a match. And unfortunately, they did not, as far as I am aware of, they did not test the Anderson family line DNA to conclusively say if this was Bruce Anderson or if it was, someone else. But in this case, Bobby Dunbar is still missing. Even though there was a man who grew up and lived his whole life believing that he was Bobby Dunbar, he was not. And his family line was completely messed up due to one mistake. And it could have been a mistake, it could have been a crime. I really don't know, but let's get into the theories. So the first theory, obviously, is that Bobby Dunbar drowned. And I'm going to dismiss this simply for the fact that how vividly they searched that lake. They took all sorts of precautions to try to look for him within the lake to see if he drowned, and these all turned up with no result. So I personally don't believe this. The next theory is that an alligator ate him, or an animal got him. So they believe this because by the railroads, if you remember me mentioning the railroads, they actually did find bear prints, and they did not find any remains or evidence of him being eaten by an animal or taken by an animal and brought somewhere else or anything like that. So as far as the bear thing goes, I don't know, not sure. But they did also believe that he could have been eaten by an alligator. And due to this, they actually took a bunch of the alligators that they could catch within the lake and cut the alligators open to see if Bobby's remains were inside of the alligators' stomachs, which is so gross and really kind of fucked up, because if an alligator did get him, what are you gonna do? You gonna arrest the alligator? I mean, I get that like the family wants closure and stuff like that, but you've already put dynamite in the lake. You're cutting open all of these alligators. You're doing so much damage to the environment. I understand, like I get it. I get why they do it, but still, being an environmentalist, I can't. But unfortunately, like I said, they did not find any remains of Bobby within any of the alligators that they actually cut open. So as far as an animal getting him, it's likely, but I'm going to dismiss it. So the next theory is that he was actually kidnapped. And this is very, very possible. As far as the lake goes, he could have been taken on a boat. There was train tracks, so he could have been taken on a train or down the train tracks to like a vehicle or something of that sort. So it's very, very possible that he was kidnapped. They did, however, look for him in multiple states and even did an extensive search in New Orleans, which was about 130 miles away from where they were. But within these cases, you do have to include every possibility, and that is definitely possible that someone did kidnap him. And the last theory is that Bobby Dunbar was actually murdered and disposed of by his parents. And I don't really believe that it was by his parents. If anything, it might have been his father, because I did read that he had some violent tendencies. But the mother fainted. As far as like fainting goes, I don't think you can really fake fainting. Have you ever tried to fake faint? It's not easy, because your natural instinct is to like catch yourself. So I don't know. Fainting just goes out the window for me. So I don't believe this in this case. I think that Bobby Dunbar was kidnapped, and maybe we'll never find out what really happened to him, but I believe that he was kidnapped. But it is unfortunate because two families were pretty much at war with each other. But yeah, it's kind of crazy to have like a story go down your generational line. Even with the Andersons too, they were always told that their grandfather or whatever got kidnapped. They said that he got kidnapped and was taken. So the fact that, that was like a generational story passed down through their family is kind of crazy. But unfortunately, we'll never know what happened to Bobby Dunbar. We do know that the man who was raised as Bobby Dunbar is not Bobby Dunbar. And unfortunately, he himself will never know that because they did this after he died. But yeah, it's just a really messed up case for both families, and it's one of the weirdest cases in American history, I would say, as far as someone living their whole life thinking that they're a different person. And that in itself is kind of crazy, and both families probably needed extensive therapy after this, because I would. But thank you guys so much for watching my video. Please go ahead and give this video a like if you did like it. Leave a comment down below too as to what you think happened to Bobby, the real Bobby. And I would love to discuss this with you guys in the comments. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Like, subscribe, all that stuff, and I will see you guys next Wednesday.